Welcome, dreamers of the Force, wanderers of the galaxy. Today, we journey through the galaxy's forgotten beginnings. This is where the Star Wars saga truly begins. Before the Skywalkers, before the Rebellion, before the Jedi and the Sith took their names and drew their battle lines, there was only the Force. It was not divided, not yet called light or dark. It was a singular breath in the galaxy, an invisible rhythm humming in the stones, the trees, the stars. It moved with the tides. It whispered through ancient winds, and it connected all things. This was a time before lightsabers, before republics and empires, when those who felt the Force did so as wanderers, seekers, and sages. On the ocean-cloaked planet of Ahch-To, high atop a jagged island cliff, the first Jedi temple was built. The one called the Prime Jedi meditated here, in harmony with the waves and wind, not to wage war, but to listen. These early Jedi, unburdened by dogma or military duty, saw the Force as balance, neither something to be conquered nor feared. From here, the teaching spread across the stars, finding homes on planets like Jeddah, Typhon, and Ossus. Each world offered new philosophies, new questions, and new answers. But as is often true in great stories, unity eventually cracked. On Typhon, where the Force surged most powerfully, differing interpretations began to clash. Some believed in yielding to the current, flowing like water with the will of the Force. Others believed in mastering it, bending it to their desires, using it to shape the galaxy. This divergence became the first great schism. Those who pursued domination were cast out, exiled from the early Jedi Order. They wandered the dark edges of the galaxy until they reached Korriban, a red, unforgiving world where they encountered the native Sith species, a people also attuned to the dark side of the Force. Over time, the exiled Jedi and the Sith species merged, not only in culture, but in blood. They formed the Sith Order, embracing a new code that rejected peace and balance. Peace is a lie, they taught. There is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. And so, while the Jedi honed lightsabers and meditated in temples, the Sith delved into forbidden knowledge, creating holocrons filled with ancient secrets, channeling hatred into their kyber crystals until the blades bled red. It was not long before the galaxy saw its first great wars between light and shadow. These were not yet the Clone Wars or the Galactic Civil War, but brutal conflicts that shaped the very structure of space. Hyperspace lanes were carved through the stars, systems were enslaved or liberated, entire civilizations rose and fell in the wake of these force-fueled wars. Ancient weapons like the Thought Bomb, created by Sith Lords to trap Jedi souls, were unleashed, leaving haunted planets behind. The Jedi, scattered across the galaxy, tried to bring order, but even in their early days, they struggled with pride and rigidity. Some Jedi grew weary of the Council's dogma and became way-seekers, travelers who followed the Force wherever it led, without allegiance to code or order. Others, like Revan and Malak in later centuries, would walk both light and dark, leaving legacies that blurred the line between savior and tyrant. And so the pattern began, light rising, darkness responding, both pulling at the fragile balance of the galaxy. Though the Sith were eventually believed to be destroyed in what became known as the Rule of Two era, when Darth Bane restructured the Sith to only 2 members at a time, 1 master and 1 apprentice, their influence never vanished. It merely went underground, like embers waiting for wind. In these earliest eras, the seeds were planted, the philosophies were written, the sabers were forged, and the galaxy spun onward, unaware of the Skywalker storm that would one day rise. But even now, as the Force slumbered gently across the stars, its whispers were never truly silent. In the deep of space, stories were forming. Stories of heroes not yet born, of twins separated by destiny, of chosen ones and fallen masters, of rebellions ignited by hope. All of it was coming. But for now, in this ancient chapter, we simply drift, listening to the first breath of a saga that will echo forever. The galaxy exhaled into a new age, an age of marble halls, soaring libraries, and temples bathed in sunlight. The old republic had risen, and with it, a vision of peace and democracy began to spread across the stars like a slow, deliberate tide. The Jedi Order stood as guardians of this vision, not rulers, but stewards, ambassadors of harmony who answered to the Republic Senate, wielding both diplomacy and lightsaber with the same reverence. Their temples dotted worlds like Coruscant, Ilum, and Lothal, each a sanctuary for the study of the Force, for contemplation, and for training those sensitive to its whisper. This was the golden age of the Jedi, a time when star systems willingly aligned themselves to the Republic's ideals, when younglings trained beneath towering statues and archivists recorded the echoes of ancient Force lore. But golden ages rarely last forever. Beneath the Senate's polished floors, corruption had begun to seep. Planets on the Outer Rim felt neglected, their voices drowned beneath core world politics. Trade routes were taxed unfairly, and corporations like the Trade Federation and Techno Union began to grow bolder, wealthier, and more dangerous. The Jedi, once focused purely on spiritual guidance and peacekeeping, found themselves caught in the machinery of galactic bureaucracy. They sat in council chambers discussing treaties and trade disputes, their lightsabers gathering dust while their purpose quietly drifted. And in the shadows, a whisper was growing louder. The Sith, long thought extinct, were not gone. They had simply adapted. They watched the Republic from behind cloaks and smiles, manipulating its gears through politics rather than force. One of them, a man named Darth Plagueis, delved into forbidden knowledge so deeply that he believed he could manipulate the Force itself to create life and prevent death. His apprentice, a cunning politician known to the galaxy as Sheev Palpatine, began his ascent, not with war, but with charm. As the Jedi celebrated their golden age, the dark side was planting a seed that would one day bloom into galactic collapse. But in this era, few could see it. The Jedi Order remained respected, almost revered. Their lightsabers, often blue or green, reflected peace and clarity. Some carried purple, signifying balance between light and darkness, while rare hues like yellow marked temple guards or seekers of knowledge. They studied 7 distinct combat forms: Shicho, the basic form taught to all younglings; Makashi, the elegant dueling style favored by Count Dooku; Soresu, a defensive form emphasizing patience; Ataru, the aggressive, acrobatic form used by Yoda; Gemso, built on strength and counterattacks; Niman, a balanced but less specialized form; and the deadly, unpredictable Juyo, which flirted dangerously with emotional intensity. Lightsabers were more than weapons. They were expressions of their wielders' philosophies. Some hilts were traditional, sleek and simple. Others were curved, like those of dueling masters. Still others hid secrets, folding, switching forms, or containing rare crystals that changed color with emotion. Jedi constructed them in sacred ceremonies, often guided by the Force, in places like Ilum's Kyber crystal caves, where silence spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, the Republic grew. The Senate became crowded. Planets jockeyed for influence. The Jedi were called more often into conflicts, not just to resolve disputes, but to enforce peace. Some Jedi began to question this role. Were they peacekeepers, or had they become soldiers? As the Republic expanded, so too did unrest. Small wars flared along the Outer Rim. Pirates and mercenaries, often backed by rival factions, disrupted trade. The Jedi found themselves stretched thin, mediating conflicts one day and defending diplomats the next. Each skirmish, each Senate argument, each whispered bribe eroded the Republic's integrity, though few in the core worlds noticed. And all the while, a senator from Naboo, Palpatine, gained trust. He listened, he flattered, he played the long game. The Jedi sensed something, a disturbance in the Force, but they couldn't place it. Perhaps they didn't want to. Their order had grown proud. Arrogance clouded the wisdom that once guided them, and their visions of the future, once clear, grew murky. Elsewhere, in the deepest parts of the galaxy, the Sith were not only hiding, they were evolving. No longer armies and warlords, they became masterminds and schemers. Palpatine, under his Sith name, Darth Sidious, began to construct a web so vast that even the Jedi, in all their clarity, could not see its shape. He groomed a new apprentice, Darth Maul, raised in hatred and taught to channel rage through a double-bladed red saber, a weapon designed for offense and intimidation. It was not a matter of if the Sith would return, it was only a matter of when. And the Jedi, though noble and powerful, had begun to forget that the Force is not theirs alone to command. It moves as it wills, it lifts and breaks, builds and buries, and soon a new generation would be born, one that would unknowingly stand at the center of this unraveling balance. The galaxy, for now, held its breath. The Republic, though cracked, still stood. The Jedi, though faltering, still watched. The Sith, though hidden, still plotted, and in the quiet spaces between light and dark, the Force whispered of a prophecy. A chosen one who would bring balance, but balance, like peace, is never easily understood, and sometimes, to build a better future, the past must fall. The suns rose over Tatooine, not in glory, but in routine, spilling light across a world forgotten by the Republic and untouched by the Jedi. It was here, on a planet of sand, slavery, and silence, that destiny stirred quietly inside the heart of a boy. But far from Tatooine, in the grand cityscape of Coruscant, politics buzzed like a hornet's nest. The Trade Federation had imposed a blockade on the peaceful world of Naboo, protesting taxation of trade routes. It seemed like economics, like bureaucracy, but it was bait. Chancellor Valorum sent 2 Jedi, Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi, to negotiate, but the Federation, secretly aligned with the Sith, attempted to kill them instead. It was the beginning of the end. The Jedi escaped and rescued Queen Padme Amidala, the young and determined ruler of Naboo. When their ship was damaged during escape, they made an emergency landing on Tatooine, where fate waited in the form of Anakin Skywalker, a 9-year-old slave, born of a virgin mother, strangely strong in the Force. Qui-Gon sensed something ancient in him, something prophesied. The boy won his freedom in a pod race and left the only home he knew, believing in the stars above and the hope they whispered. Meanwhile, on Naboo, the invasion escalated. Amidala returned to her world with Jedi protection and formed an alliance with the native Gungans, uniting 2 peoples long divided. Together they launched a resistance. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon faced the dark force behind the Federation, Darth Maul, a Sith assassin wielding a double-bladed lightsaber, and fury sharpened into silence. In a duel that sliced through corridors and history alike, Maul struck down Qui-Gon. But Obi-Wan, with focus and fire, defeated him, splitting Maul in 2 and earning his place as a Jedi Knight. With Qui-Gon's dying breath, he made Obi-Wan promise to train Anakin, and so, with a heavy heart, Obi-Wan accepted the responsibility. The Jedi Council hesitated, sensing danger in the boy, but they relented. The prophecy of the Chosen One echoed in their minds. The Sith, they believed, had been vanquished, but in truth, Darth Maul's master, Darth Sidious, remained, deeper in shadow than ever before, and in a twist of irony, he stood beneath the Senate Dome as Senator Palpatine of Naboo, elected in a wave of sympathy and fear to be the new Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. The game had only just begun. Anakin Skywalker was unlike other Padawans, strong, willful, emotionally tethered to people rather than principles. His lightsaber was blue, but his fire was red. He trained under Obi-Wan, learned the ways of the Force, but also wrestled with dreams of his mother, of pain, of destiny. And though he sought to be good, the path of the Jedi often felt too narrow for his soul. Years passed. The Republic continued to crack. Separatist systems, led by the charismatic Count Dooku, a former Jedi who had lost faith, threatened to leave the Republic. War stirred on the horizon. In secret, Dooku was Darth Tyrannus, apprentice to Darth Sidious. Together, they orchestrated the creation of a clone army, seeded long ago by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, who had foreseen war and been quietly removed. On Kamino, a world lost to the Jedi archives, the clones were grown in vats, modeled after the bounty hunter Jango Fett, disciplined and deadly. The Jedi, desperate for balance, failed to ask the right questions. An assassination attempt on Senator Amidala, now older, wiser, and reunited with Anakin, triggered the next phase. Obi-Wan investigated and traced the mystery to Kamino, discovering the clone army. Anakin was assigned to protect Padme, and their bond, once innocent, bloomed into forbidden love. When Obi-Wan was captured on Geonosis by Dooku, the Jedi mounted a rescue, joined by the clones, and the first battle of the Clone Wars erupted, thousands of blue and red blades igniting under the roar of starfighters and the march of droids. Yoda himself arrived, green saber drawn, to save his students. The galaxy tilted. Peace was lost. War had come. Through the Clone Wars, Anakin became a general, admired and feared. His methods were effective but ruthless. He saved lives but often broke rules. Padme, now secretly his wife, watched as the galaxy burned. Meanwhile, Sidious manipulated both sides, ensuring no victory was final, no battle truly decisive. Count Dooku remained the face of the Separatists, but always a pawn. Anakin trained a Padawan, Ahsoka Tano, a Togruta girl whose independence challenged his beliefs and sharpened his compassion. She would later be framed for a bombing, walk away from the Jedi, and leave Anakin feeling betrayed by the very institution he had devoted his life to. The cracks within him widened. When Dooku was finally defeated by Anakin during a mission to rescue Chancellor Palpatine, something broke. Anakin executed Dooku at the Chancellor's command, despite his surrender. It felt wrong, but it also felt powerful. Palpatine leaned in closer, whispering tales of Sith power, of secrets to prevent death. Anakin's dreams returned, Padme dying in childbirth. Fear gripped him, desperation replaced clarity, and as the Jedi Council grew suspicious of Palpatine's influence, the Chancellor declared himself Emperor, initiating Order 66. The clones, loyal through hidden programming, turned on their Jedi commanders. Across the galaxy, lightsabers were extinguished. Masters and Padawans struck down in betrayal. Anakin, now Darth Vader, led a massacre at the Jedi Temple, even killing younglings. Padme wept. Obi-Wan confronted him, and on the volcanic world of Mustafar, mentor and student dueled beneath fire and ash. Obi-Wan, heartbroken, defeated him. Anakin was left burning, physically shattered, spiritually hollow. Padme gave birth to twins, Luke and Leia, before dying, her heart broken. The twins were separated and hidden. Vader was reborn in a black suit of armor, breathing through machinery, the last echo of Anakin drowned in rage, and the Empire rose, forged not by war, but by silence. Fear ruled. The Jedi were gone. The galaxy changed. The galaxy lay beneath the heel of the Empire, a vast silence stretching across star systems like a long-held breath. Where once the Republic thrived in discourse and democracy, now there was only decree, issued by Emperor Palpatine, whose rise to power had been swift and manipulative, like a snake coiling in plain sight. The Jedi were gone, labeled traitors, their stories smeared by propaganda, their temples sealed and desecrated. In their place stood Darth Vader, a towering enforcer clad in black, his breath mechanical, his heart buried beneath layers of pain and fire. No longer the promising boy of prophecy, Vader served the very darkness he once vowed to destroy, his former name whispered only by ghosts and those who remembered what the galaxy had lost. Amid the quiet of oppression, hope was not extinguished, it was hidden. Seeds of rebellion took root in the outer rim, among smugglers, senators, and survivors who refused to forget. One such flicker was a child named Leia Organa, raised as royalty on Alderaan by Senator Bail Organa and Queen Breha. Though she wore silks and spoke in courtly tones, Leia's blood carried the fire of a fallen Jedi and the soul of a freedom fighter. She grew bold, clever, and unshakably committed to the cause of resistance. Her twin, Luke Skywalker, grew in simpler soil, among sand and scrap and moisture vapors on Tatooine, unaware of the galaxy's wounds or his own lineage. Raised by Owen and Beru Lars, Luke stared at the twin sons, aching for a purpose he couldn't name. He dreamed of adventure while the Force pulsed quietly in his veins, waiting. The Empire's cruelty grew systematic. Planets were stripped of resources, culture flattened beneath uniformed commands. The Senate remained, but only as a puppet. the illusion of diplomacy while Palpatine pulled strings in the dark. Vader hunted the remaining Jedi, those who had fled Order 66. Among them, Obi-Wan Kenobi disappeared into the dunes of Tatooine, taking the name Ben and watching from afar as Luke grew. He lived in solitude, a guardian of a forgotten age, haunted by failure, yet holding fast to the boy who might someday restore the light. Elsewhere, rebels whispered across encrypted channels. They sabotaged supply lines, stole secrets, and carried on like embers in a storm. Among them were brave names like Mon Mothma, Saw Gerrera, and Cassian Andor. But it was Galen Erso, a scientist once employed by the Empire, who designed a flaw within its greatest weapon, the Death Star, a moon-sized station capable of destroying entire planets. His daughter, Jyn Erso, became the unlikely torchbearer of his secret. Through sacrifice, bravery, and the courage of the few, she and her companions delivered the Death Star plans to the Rebel Alliance, dying as the first true spark of hope lit the sky. Those plans reached Leia Organa, who fled with them aboard the Tantive I-4. But Vader was close behind. The moment that would change everything unfolded in silence, Leia slipping the plans into a droid named R2-D2, who escaped with his counterpart C-3PO to Tatooine. There, fate stirred again. R2 wandered into Luke Skywalker's life, carrying with him a message: "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope." And thus, the wheels of destiny turned once more. Luke sought out Obi-Wan, now aged and weary. The old Jedi revealed fragments of the truth, of the Force, the Jedi Order, and Luke's father, who he claimed had been murdered by Darth Vader. Obi-Wan offered Luke his father's lightsaber and a chance to step into something greater. When stormtroopers killed Luke's aunt and uncle, his path became clear. Joined by the smuggler Han Solo and the Wookiee Chewbacca, Luke set out to deliver the plans and rescue Leia. They succeeded, but not without cost. Obi-Wan confronted Vader aboard the Death Star and allowed himself to fall, struck down, but not destroyed. He became one with the Force, his voice guiding Luke beyond death. The Rebel Alliance, armed with the stolen plans, launched an attack on the Death Star. In an X-Wing starfighter, Luke flew into legend. With the Force as his ally and guided by Obi-Wan's voice, he destroyed the battle station with a single shot, igniting the rebellion into full-scale war. The Empire responded with fury. Vader, now obsessed with the pilot who destroyed the Death Star, scoured the galaxy. Luke, meanwhile, trained in fits and starts, learning the Force through instinct and whispers. The rebels fled to Hoth, an icy world hidden in the galactic void, but the Empire found them. A brutal assault followed. The rebels scattered. Luke, following a vision, traveled to Dagobah, a swamp-covered planet veiled in the Force. There he met Yoda, once a mighty Jedi Master, now exiled and cryptic. Yoda reluctantly agreed to train Luke, who struggled with fear, anger, and impatience. Meanwhile, Leia, Han, and their companions evaded capture, seeking refuge in the Cloud City of Bespin, ruled by Han's old friend, Lando Calrissian, but it was a trap. Vader captured Han, freezing him in carbonite, and used Leia as bait. Luke, sensing their danger, abandoned his training and raced to confront Vader, believing he was ready, but he was not. Their duel was fierce, brutal, intimate. In the shadows of Cloud City, Vader revealed the truth. "I am your father." It shattered Luke. The truth unraveled everything. His hands severed, his spirit shaken, he barely escaped. The galaxy tilted again. Vader was Anakin. The war was not just galactic, it was personal. The lines between destiny and identity blurred. Luke returned to his friends, haunted by what he had learned, but hope remained. And as the saga moved toward its next crescendo, the question rose like a distant star. Could the son redeem the father? Could light still rise from darkness? The stars above Endor glimmered with distant indifference as war crept quietly into its orbit. The rebellion, battered and bruised, now stood at the edge of its greatest gamble. Intelligence had revealed a second Death Star, larger, more powerful, but still under construction, floating in the shadow of a forest moon. This time, the trap was twofold. While the station's destructive capabilities were not yet active, it was protected by an energy shield from the surface of Endor, and the Emperor himself would oversee its completion. For the Alliance, it was both a dire threat and a rare opportunity. To strike at the heart of darkness, to decapitate the Empire in one decisive blow. But the mission would be more than military. It would be spiritual, emotional, and inescapably personal for Luke Skywalker. The boy from Tatooine had grown into something more. A Jedi, perhaps not by council recognition, but by courage, sacrifice, and a quiet strength that now radiated from him like a steady flame. He wore black, not in defiance, but in acknowledgement of the shadow he carried within. And that shadow had a name: Vader. Han Solo, newly rescued from the icy slumber of carbonite, volunteered to lead the strike team on Endor. Alongside him were Leia, Chewbacca, and the ever-loyal droids. Luke joined them, though his eyes lingered more often now on the horizon, sensing what lay ahead. His bond to Vader had deepened, not through violence but through understanding, and a rising belief that somewhere within the mask Anakin still breathed. On Endor, the mission tangled with nature. The native Ewoks, small tribal beings with Stone Age tools and enormous hearts, eventually allied with the rebels. Despite the disparity in size and technology, their courage and cleverness would prove critical. Meanwhile, Luke, feeling the pull of the Force and the weight of inevitable confrontation, surrendered himself to Vader, who brought him before the Emperor aboard the Death Star. The throne room glowed coldly, the stars outside the window casting no warmth. Palpatine smiled, not with kindness, but with certainty. He saw Luke not as a threat, but as a vessel, ready to be filled with rage and remade as an agent of the dark. As the fleet above engaged in a desperate battle and Han's team fought to disable the shield, Luke faced his greatest test. Palpatine needled and provoked. He spoke of the rebellion's doom, of his friends' deaths, of the futility of resistance, and Luke, for all his resolve, began to fracture. When Vader threatened Leia, something inside him broke. The lightsaber ignited and the duel erupted, not with grace but with fury. Luke fought not as a Jedi, but as a son, a brother, a protector, untrained in hatred, yet wielding it like a flame. Blow after blow, he drove Vader back, battering the black-armored warrior with the raw strength of fear and love colliding, until finally he struck, slicing off Vader's hand. The mechanical limb sparked and hissed, mirroring Luke's own cybernetic hand, and in that reflection he saw himself, not as a victor, but as a breath away from falling. He deactivated his blade and turned to Palpatine. "I am a Jedi," he said, "like my father before me." It was not a declaration of power, but of peace. Palpatine responded with lightning. The dark side surged through Luke's body in jagged arcs. He screamed, collapsing beneath the storm of energy. Vader rose, torn between silence and salvation, and in a moment that cracked the very heart of the saga, he chose. He lifted Palpatine, the man who had enslaved him, twisted him, destroyed him, and hurled him into the abyss. The Emperor's scream vanished in light, and silence returned. Vader fell, mortally wounded. Luke cradled him, removed the helmet. Beneath the mask was not a monster, but a man, scarred, pale, weary, Anakin Skywalker. He looked upon his son with quiet pride. "You were right," he whispered. "Tell your sister, you were right." And then with a breath he was gone, not as Vader, but as Anakin, redeemed. The shield on Endor fell. The rebels destroyed the Death Star. The Empire fractured. The war was not over, but the darkness had been pierced. On the forest moon, flames rose in celebration. Leia, now aware she was not only Luke's sister, but the daughter of Vader, carried the knowledge with dignity. Han, unsure but supportive, stayed by her side. Luke lit the pyre for Anakin alone, watching the fire consume not just a body, but a legacy. As embers rose into the night, three spirits appeared beyond the flames: Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin, together, luminous and whole. For the first time in a generation, there was peace. But in galaxies shaped by myth, peace is never the final chapter. It is only a breath before the next awakening. The embers of war had barely cooled when the galaxy began to shift once more. Time passed, but peace, that delicate and fleeting illusion, did not endure. The heroes of the rebellion scattered into myth, their stories whispered in the corners of forgotten cantinas, while the fractures of the old empire reformed in silence, out beyond the reach of the new republic. In the cold, distant edges of space, a shadow stirred, shapeless at first, then coalescing into a rising power. The First Order, born from the ashes of imperial ambition, grew in secret, fueled by fear, fanaticism, and the unshakable belief that order must be restored at any cost. In the center of this growing storm, a boy named Ben Solo carried within him a legacy too heavy to bear. The son of Princess Leia Organa and General Han Solo, and the nephew of Luke Skywalker, Ben was raised in the light, but haunted by the dark. From an early age, he felt the pull of something ancient, something deep and primal, clawing at the edges of his mind. Hoping to protect him, Leia sent him to train under Luke, now a solemn Jedi Master, burdened by the weight of rebuilding an order that had once fallen under his father's blade. But fear is a corrosive thread, and trust frayed under its pressure. Luke, sensing the growing darkness in Ben, made a terrible mistake. One moment of hesitation, a flash of fear in the night, and the bond between uncle and nephew was shattered. Ben destroyed the temple, fled into the unknown, and found his place beside Supreme Leader Snoke, a being of twisted manipulation who promised to guide his power. Ben Solo was gone. In his place stood Kylo Ren. Meanwhile, the galaxy tilted again toward chaos. The New Republic, bloated and complacent, failed to recognize the threat until it was too late. The Resistance, a small force led by Leia, stood as a final line of defense against the darkness rising anew, and into this maelstrom stepped a girl from the sands, Rey, a scavenger on the desert world of Jakku. Abandoned as a child, she had lived alone among the wreckage of a forgotten war, trading scraps of metal for rations, her days a rhythm of dust and survival. But Rey was not ordinary. When she crossed paths with a runaway stormtrooper named Finn and a lost droid carrying part of a galactic map, her destiny awakened. Pursued by the First Order, she piloted the Millennium Falcon with uncanny skill, encountered Han Solo and Chewbacca, and began to uncover the threads of her mysterious past. The Force, long dormant in her life, now surged like a tide beneath her feet. Han, older now and wearier, saw something familiar in Rey, a spark of defiance, a quiet strength. He brought her to Maz Kanata, a wise and ancient seer who led her to the ruins beneath her castle. There, Rey found a lightsaber, Luke's saber, once lost, now calling to her. When she touched it, visions overwhelmed her. 1,000 voices, 1,000 faces, past and future, collapsing into a single breath. She fled, terrified of the power awakening inside her. Meanwhile, Starkiller Base, a monstrous weapon carved from an icy planet, loomed in the void. Powered by a dying star, it could annihilate entire systems in one breath. The First Order used it to destroy the New Republic's capital, sending a shockwave of fear across the stars. The Resistance had to act swiftly. They launched an assault to disable the weapon, but the battle came at a terrible cost. On the surface, Han confronted his son. In the cold, narrow bridge at the heart of Starkiller Base, he called out not to Kylo Ren, but to Ben. And for a moment, it seemed the boy might return, but pain, confusion, and manipulation won. Ben plunged his blade into his father's chest, killing Han Solo. The galaxy held its breath. Chewbacca roared in anguish and fired. The Resistance struck. The planet began to collapse, and in the forest outside, Rey faced Kylo. At first, she fled. But as the earth cracked and the sky screamed, something shifted. The Force surged within her, not chaotic or destructive, but focused, alive. She called the lightsaber to her hand, and with it she stood. Their duel was raw, brutal. Kylo, wounded and conflicted. Rey, untrained but guided by instinct and something more, clarity. She bested him not through rage but resolve. The ground split, separating them. Rey escaped with Finn and Chewbacca aboard the Falcon. Starkiller Base imploded into nothingness. The Resistance survived, but barely. And as Rey returned, the map completed. The last pieces pointed to a distant island, hidden among oceans and storms. She journeyed there alone, climbed the winding steps and at the summit found him, Luke Skywalker, aged, silent, cloaked not just in robes but in guilt. She held out the saber, wordlessly. The Force stirred. The saga had not ended. It had only begun again. The island stood like a sentinel in the sea, Arch-2, a forgotten place where the first Jedi temple had once breathed in the silence of wind and waves. Here, Rey had found Luke Skywalker, the legendary hero turned myth, now withdrawn from the galaxy and burdened by the failures that haunted him like shadows on stone. She held out his lightsaber, the blade of his youth, but he did not speak. He only looked, through her, into her, perhaps into himself. Then he turned away. The days passed with weighty quietude. Rey trained alone, climbing the cliffs, observing the creatures of the island, feeling the Force pulse faintly beneath her skin. Luke finally spoke, not as a mentor, but as a man who had seen too much. He told her the Jedi must end, that their pride had blinded them, that their legacy was failure. He had once tried to pass on what he had learned, only to lose Ben Solo and ignite the rise of Kylo Ren. To him, the Force was not the weapon of warriors, but a balance, light, dark, life, death. And yet, despite his reluctance, the island began to respond to Rey. She touched the stone, meditated by the waves, and the Force responded in turn. Vision swept her into places she could not name. She saw the dark cave beneath the island and descended into its echoing throat. There, she confronted a mirror of herself, endless reflections, seeking her origin, her family. But when she asked who her parents were, only her own face stared back. The Force showed her not who she came from, but who she was becoming. Meanwhile, Kylo Ren, fractured and seething, struggled with the ghost of his father and the pain of his choices. Supreme Leader, Snoke manipulated this torment, mocking Kylo's mask, calling him a child in a costume. But in the threads of darkness, Rey and Kylo began to see each other, not with their eyes, but through the Force itself. Their connection bridged space, allowing them to speak, argue, question. Rey sensed conflict in him. Kylo sensed power in her. Both were adrift, searching. When Rey tried to bring Luke back, he refused, so she left, believing she could turn Kylo back to the light. Luke, alone with his memories, finally opened himself again to the Force. He saw Leia, his sister, wounded, holding on by will alone. He remembered who he had been, and on the other side of the galaxy, the Resistance fled for its life. Hunted by the First Order through space, running out of fuel and hope, they suffered loss after loss. Poe Dameron, reckless and passionate, led a mutiny. Finn and Rose embarked on a desperate mission to find a codebreaker, ending in betrayal and near disaster. The Resistance dwindled. Leia, recovering from a brush with death, returned to command with quiet steel. When Rey arrived aboard Snoke's flagship, she was captured and brought before the Supreme Leader. Snoke boasted, mocked, and manipulated, but Kylo, standing beside Rey, made his choice. With a flicker of resolve, he turned his saber and killed Snoke. Chaos erupted. Together, Rey and Kylo fought side by side against the Praetorian Guards, blades dancing in crimson shadow. For a heartbeat, it seemed redemption had come, but when the last enemy fell, Kylo extended his hand, not in peace, but in conquest. He urged Rey to abandon the past, to rule the galaxy beside him. She refused. They fought, each struggling to claim the lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker. The blade split in two with a blinding flash. The Resistance, cornered and battered, escaped to Crate, a remote planet coated in white salt and red earth. With the First Order descending, they braced for their final stand. Their signal for help went unanswered. All hope seemed lost, and then Luke Skywalker appeared. Younger, whole, cloaked in blue light and calm determination. He stepped onto the battlefield alone, faced Kylo Ren, and stood as a legend returned. Their duel was poetic, measured. Kylo struck again and again, but could not touch him. And then he realized, Luke was not there. He was projecting himself across the stars, using the Force in a way no Jedi ever had. The effort consumed him, but not in pain. Luke faded peacefully, watching the twin suns of Arch-2 set, just as they had risen on his homeworld long ago. The Resistance escaped, carried by Rey in the Falcon. Though their numbers were few, the spark remained. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, the Emperor's voice echoed once more, ancient, patient, and not yet finished. The saga pressed onward. The galaxy stood on the edge of revelation. Whispers of the Emperor's return drifted like smoke through the darkness, impossible and undeniable. A transmission, filled with dread and power, echoed from the unknown regions, a voice not heard in decades, yet unmistakable. Emperor Palpatine, thought to be dead at the hands of Darth Vader, had spoken again. The Resistance, still fractured and healing from its losses, sent its bravest, Poe, Finn, and the loyal droid BB-8, on a mission to confirm the unthinkable. Meanwhile, Rey trained beneath the careful guidance of Leia Organa. Leia had become Rey's final teacher, not with the fierceness of battle, but with the gentleness of wisdom hard-earned. Rey studied the Jedi texts salvaged from Ahch-To, struggled to commune with the Jedi of the past, and learned to balance power with patience. Her connection to the Force deepened, but with it came shadows she couldn't explain. Visions of thrones, of her face twisted in darkness, of voices not her own. Kylo Ren, now Supreme Leader, hunted for the source of Palpatine's power. He journeyed to the dead world of Exegol, a place veiled in Sith legend, where he discovered the impossible truth. Palpatine had not perished, but lived on, broken, sustained by ancient machines and the Sith Eternal. Cloned bodies, decaying vessels, secrets long buried. Palpatine had orchestrated it all, from the rise of the First Order to Snoke to Kylo's own corruption, and now he offered Kylo a fleet, hundreds of Star Destroyers, each armed with planet-killing weapons, the Final Order. All Kylo had to do was kill the scavenger, Rey. But something deeper stirred within Kylo Ren. Ben Solo, the boy who once trained under Luke Skywalker, the son of Han and Leia, still flickered like a dying star. Rey, Poe, and Finn followed clues left in ancient texts, chasing whispers across burning deserts and haunted moons, seeking a Sith wayfinder that would lead them to Exegol. Their journey took them to Pasaana, where Rey felt a presence she couldn't ignore. Kylo was there. Their bond through the Force had grown stronger, stranger. They saw each other through time and space, their hands brushing across realities, their voices connected across stars. A chase led to revelation. Rey, daughter of no one, was in fact the granddaughter of Palpatine. A legacy of darkness flowed in her blood. She had always sensed it, the pull of rage, the fear of herself. On Kef Bir, amidst the wreckage of the second Death Star, Rey faced a vision of herself as a Sith, black-robed and snarling, twin blades crossed. It rattled her, and then Kylo arrived. Their duel was fierce and filled with pain, not only in blows but in truths unsaid. In a final strike, Rey stabbed him, but paused, sensing Leia's hand reach through the Force one last time to call to her son. Leia's body faded with her last breath. Rey, overwhelmed, healed Kylo with her touch, whispered that she would not be like him, and fled. Alone and broken, Kylo saw a vision, a memory, a moment, a mercy. His father, Han Solo, stood before him. Not a Force ghost, but something deeper, a memory laced with love. Han did not condemn, only offered. Kylo dropped his weapon. Ben Solo returned. Rey escaped to Ahch-To, ready to exile herself like Luke had, afraid of what she might become. She cast away her lightsaber, but Luke's spirit appeared, gentle and calm, lifting the saber from the fire and handing it back. He told her that some legacies we choose, and some we redefine. He revealed Leia had trained as a Jedi long ago and gifted Rey her lightsaber. Twin blades, twin hopes. Guided by the Wayfinder from Luke's old X-Wing, Rey found Exegol. The sky was black with lightning, the Sith temple rising from the stone like a graveyard monument. Palpatine awaited her, frail yet powerful, surrounded by acolytes and machines. He revealed his plan. She would strike him down, and his spirit would pass into her. All the Sith would live again through her. But Rey resisted, and then Ben arrived. Now dressed in black, but no longer a shadow, he fought his way through the Knights of Ren, his former allies. Rey felt his presence, and together, through the Force, they shared a final connection. She passed him her lightsaber, and he wielded it as if destiny had returned to his hand. Side by side, they faced Palpatine, but he had other plans. Realizing their bond was a dyad in the Force, life force united, he drained them both, restoring his body, rising with new strength. He threw Ben into the chasm. Rey fell, nearly lost, but the voices of the Jedi echoed within her, the spirits of generations past. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Yoda, Ahsoka, Mace, Qui-Gon, Luke, Leia, they spoke, and Rey rose. Two sabers crossed. She faced Palpatine's storm and pushed it back, not in rage, but in light. He disintegrated, ending the Sith. Rey collapsed, her life spent. Ben returned, broken but alive. He held her and gave his own life to save hers. In their final moment, they shared a kiss. Then he faded, becoming one with the Force. Peace returned. The galaxy breathed again. Rey traveled to Tatooine, to the old Lars homestead where Luke had once dreamed beneath twin suns. She buried the sabers of Luke and Leia beneath the sand. A woman asked her name. Rey looked to the horizon and saw the spirits of Luke and Leia, silent and smiling. "Rey Skywalker," she said, and the sun set on a saga. In the wake of the fall of the Final Order, the galaxy entered an era of uncertain calm. The ashes of war still smoldered, but a new breath stirred beneath them, soft, tentative, but unmistakably alive. The Resistance, now a scattered coalition of rebels, former soldiers, and ordinary beings from across the stars, began the difficult task of rebuilding not only their fleets and cities, but trust. Across once occupied systems, symbols of the First Order were dismantled, and memorials rose in quiet fields and broken town squares. Rey, now bearing the name Skywalker, wandered not as a warrior, but as a seeker. She carried two sabers, one buried in the sands of Tatooine and one of her own making, forged with a golden blade and a hilt from her old staff. Her journey became less about battle and more about listening to the Force, to the remnants of Jedi wisdom scattered across ancient temples, and to herself. The Jedi, once a mighty order seated in marble temples, were now a whisper, a possibility waiting to be reimagined. Rey began to seek out Force-sensitive children, not to rebuild the old structure, but to plant something new, gentler, more aware of balance than dogma. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Empire and the First Order did not vanish with their leaders. Across the Outer Rim and the unknown regions, pockets of power remained. Warlords, surviving Sith cults, fragmented battalions. The New Republic, having failed once to prevent tyranny's return, approached with caution. Mon Mothma's legacy now lived on through young senators trying to balance freedom with vigilance. The Mandalorians, once fractured and hidden, rose again under the banner of unity. Bo-Katan Kryze, once wielder of the Darksaber, had faced loss and betrayal. Yet the Mandalorians found purpose again, not just in war, but in heritage. Grogu, the small Force-sensitive child once in the care of Din Djarin, continued to grow. Though he had walked away from Luke Skywalker's training, the Force remained strong within him, and his bond with Din became the heart of a different kind of Jedi path, one rooted in loyalty, not tradition. As bounty hunters, New Republic marshals, and surviving Jedi wove their stories into the stars, a broader truth emerged. The galaxy was not a static story of light and dark, but an ever-evolving dance between power and purpose. The rise and fall of empires had left scars. Entire systems like Mandalore had become graveyards, while others like Navarro sought to reinvent themselves. In the shadow of these changes, whispers of deeper threats began to rise once more. Rumors of cloning experiments far beyond the legacy of Palpatine, research into ancient Sith artifacts, and ships vanishing into hyperspace lanes once thought safe, all stirred echoes of danger not yet named. Acolytes of the Sith, those who never gave up the dream of eternal darkness, searched forgotten ruins for holocrons, while rogue scientists bent time and flesh in service of forgotten agendas. Yet in all of this, the Force remained, not as a weapon to be wielded, but as a current that flowed through the galaxy, unseen yet ever present. Rey often meditated on Ahch-To, standing before the ancient tree, hearing the ocean crash below her. She sensed the Jedi who had come before her, not just Luke and Leia, but those whose names were lost in time. She knew she was not the end of the Jedi, but their continuation in a form they never could have imagined. Far in the depths of the unknown regions, where even star charts dared not go, a new presence stirred. Neither Jedi nor Sith. Something older. Perhaps it had been waiting. Perhaps it had always been there. But now, the galaxy turned its gaze forward. Not in fear, but in readiness. New heroes would rise, old legends would guide them, and the Force would be with them, always. Long before the Skywalker Saga unfolded, before Anakin was born, before the Clone Wars erupted, and even before the Sith threatened galactic balance, there existed a golden age known as the High Republic. It was a time when the Jedi were not warriors of war, but stewards of peace, wisdom, and exploration. Their temple spanned from the core worlds to the far reaches of the Outer Rim. Jedi like Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann did not chase battles. They sought harmony, serving as guardians in elegant white and gold starships called Vectors, powered by the Force itself. The Republic was expanding, and the galaxy felt full of possibility. But even in light, darkness lingered. The Nihil, chaotic marauders who navigated hyperspace like phantoms, struck fear into systems unprepared for their fury. Their leader, Martian Ro, harbored secrets older than the Jedi Order, tied to ancient beings and lost technologies. His terror campaign sparked a shift in the Jedi, forcing them to confront questions about control, fear, and destiny that would echo for centuries. The Jedi of the High Republic believed deeply in unity, yet fractures began to form. As hyperspace disasters threatened entire systems and strange plagues warped the Force, the seeds of future conflict were planted. Over centuries, this golden age dimmed, giving rise to the more rigid, war-weary Jedi Order of the prequel era. The galaxy moved slowly but steadily toward turmoil. Political corruption seeped into the Republic's heart. On Coruscant, Chancellor after Chancellor tried to maintain peace, yet planetary disputes and corporate greed grew louder. The Trade Federation, backed by shadowy interests, gained influence, and in the shadows of it all, Darth Plagueis, master of forbidden Force alchemy, taught his apprentice Darth Sidious the secrets of life and death. This apprentice would rise to power, masquerading as Senator Palpatine, and eventually reshape the entire galaxy. Meanwhile, the Jedi, noble but increasingly blind to change, trained new generations without seeing the full storm gathering. The Clone Wars would later be remembered as a tragedy, but their origins traced back to this gradual unraveling. The Sith had returned but hidden. The light dimmed, not in a flash, but in a slow eclipse. Yet even as the Republic faded into conflict, the Force continued to weave its invisible thread, connecting beings across time. From the High Republic's graceful temples to the Senate chambers of Coruscant, the story of Star Wars was never truly about governments or wars, but about the souls caught between them. Jedi who questioned, Sith who betrayed, and ordinary people who found extraordinary courage. The entire saga, in truth, began long before Episode 1. It began with ancient texts buried beneath Jedha's sand, with temples hidden in forests, with whispers of balance carried by the wind on distant moons. And even in those early moments, before lightsabers hummed and empires rose, the Force was there, waiting. Long before hyperspace lanes were charted, before galactic governments rose or fell, there existed only myth, spoken in firelight, etched in stone, and whispered by the wind through the high peaks of Archto. Here, on this lonely oceanic world, the first Jedi Temple was built, not to wage war or dominate the stars, but to sit in stillness, to listen. These early Force-sensitive beings were not yet Jedi as we know them, but seekers of harmony, drawn by the quiet pull of the Force flowing through life and death, light and dark. They studied the balance in all things, the way tides mirrored breath, how stars were born and collapsed, how life required both shadow and sunrise. They didn't wield weapons, for there were no wars to fight. Their path was one of understanding, of aligning themselves with the invisible rhythm of the galaxy. This early group, later called the Dai Bendu in some texts, believed that the Force was not something to be used, but something to be honored. As time passed, their philosophy spread. Across the world of Typhon, Force-sensitive scholars built towering structures called Fo-Yor, pyramidal ships that carried pilgrims to sacred mountaintops where light and dark side nexuses pulsed like ancient hearts. There, the balance was not abstract, it was tangible, overwhelming, dangerous. When the Force user leaned too far into passion or fear, storms would rise, the Force itself resisting imbalance. It was from this crucible that the Jedi Order was born, not as a military force, but as monks sworn to preserve balance, even within themselves. Their earliest weapons were not lightsabers, but simple staves, meditation, and shared visions. Over generations, the technology of kyber crystals was discovered, crystals attuned to the Force, capable of focusing energy into blades of light. The first lightsabers, called proto-sabers, were large and powered by external packs, their cables restricting movement but marking a monumental shift. The Jedi could now defend if needed, but even then they hesitated. Their fight was against ignorance, not armies. Yet as the Order grew and spread to other systems, so too did conflict. Some among them began to question the idea of balance. Was it truly wrong to embrace emotion? Was passion inherently dangerous, or could it fuel greatness? These questions gave rise to division. One group, frustrated by what they saw as stagnation and dogma, split from the Order and left Typhon. They would become the Sith, not initially as villains, but as an opposing philosophy. Their creed believed in embracing the full spectrum of the Force, especially the power that came through raw emotion, through will. This ideological war eventually turned literal. The Jedi and the Sith clashed across systems in brutal confrontations known as the 100-Year Darkness. Entire worlds were scorched, cities were lost, and through it all, both sides believed they were protecting truth. It was during this era that the Sith adopted the rule of two, a structure of secrecy and succession, a master and an apprentice, no more. They would go into hiding, biding their time, waiting for the Jedi to become complacent again. Meanwhile, the Jedi restructured. They moved their headquarters to Coruscant, establishing a centralized temple and a more rigid code. The early days of exploration and vision quests faded. Order became hierarchy, peace became protocol. The Jedi were no longer wanderers seeking balance, they became guardians of a republic. And as the galaxy expanded and politics deepened, so too did the burden on the Jedi's shoulders. But the echoes of that ancient temple on Ahch-To never truly faded. The oldest Jedi texts, bound in aged leather and inked with symbols few could read, still whispered of balance, of humility, of the Force not as weapon or tool, but as a living, breathing tide. It was these texts that Luke Skywalker would one day discover, seated among porgs and ruin, wrestling with his own failure and disillusionment. In a way, the galaxy had come full circle. For the story of Star Wars, beneath the starships and battles, is a story of belief. Belief in light, belief in choice, belief that even in the darkest hour, there is something worth saving. And that belief began not with a war or a hero, but with silence, with a stone temple by the sea, with people who listened, and still do. While the Jedi Order solidified its place as guardians of peace, its greatest adversary, the Sith, did not disappear, but simply stepped deeper into shadow. Born not from evil, but from a fractured philosophy, the Sith originated as fallen Jedi who dared to explore the Force's darker dimensions, believing that passion, power, and emotion were not to be feared, but embraced. Exiled after the 100-Year Darkness, they fled to the distant planet of Moraband, once known as Korriban, a windswept red sand world strewn with ancient tombs and heavy with dark side energy. There they encountered the Sith species, and through conquest and mysticism, they forged a new culture. Not just a Force cult, but an empire. Over time, the term Sith came to mean both their ideology and their people. On Korriban, they built massive stone temples, sealed with glyphs, guarded by statues that seemed to watch even the wind. The dark side was not subtle here. It boiled in the air, whispered in dreams, and cracked the bones of those who doubted. Sith lords like Marka Ragnos, Naga Sado, and Exar Kun became more than rulers. They were gods of fear and fury, crafting holocrons of forbidden knowledge, discovering powers the Jedi dared not speak aloud. They twisted kyber crystals to bleed red with their rage, not merely for power, but as a mark of domination, forcing harmony into submission. Unlike the Jedi, the Sith did not seek balance, they sought control, yet their strength also sowed their downfall. Betrayal became tradition. Sith turned on Sith. Apprentices killed masters in endless spirals of ambition. Darth Bane, witnessing the chaos of 1,000 Sith vying for supremacy, initiated the rule of two, one to embody power, the other to crave it. A single master, a single apprentice, hidden, cunning, patient. With this new code, the Sith didn't vanish. They evolved. For 1,000 years, they watched the galaxy, studied its weaknesses, and planted seeds of corruption in Senate halls and secret chambers. By the time of Darth Plagueis and his apprentice Darth Sidious, the Jedi believed the Sith extinct. But the dark side had never been louder, only quieter. Sidious, living under the guise of Chancellor Palpatine, orchestrated galactic wars, manipulated economies, and turned the Republic's greatest defenders into soldiers of its destruction. His plan was not brute force, but subtle erosion, trust undermined, alliances twisted, truths blurred. And all the while, the Jedi sat in their temple, blind to the darkness crawling beneath their feet. The Sith's legacy was no longer lightning or sabers, it was manipulation, patience, inevitability. They crafted stories that heroes believed were their own. Sidious's rise culminated in Order 66, a single command that shattered the Jedi across the stars. Knights fell without time to ignite their sabers, temples burned, archives were lost. And on Mustafar, the sky lit with fire as Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, fell into darkness and rose as Darth Vader, the Sith's ultimate triumph. But the dark side's victory was not complete, for within the ashes, hope flickered. Luke Skywalker's journey became not just a rebellion against tyranny, but a rekindling of the Jedi flame. Yet even then, the Sith endured, biding their time in the unknown regions, gathering remnants, chasing unnatural life and cloned rebirths. Palpatine returned, a phantom in robes, whispering once more of power unlimited. His cult, the Sith Eternal, had spent decades building fleets beneath the ice of Exegol, a planet so drenched in dark side energy it bent the Force like gravity. But power taken through fear is fragile. In the end, it was not an army or a superweapon that ended the Sith, it was a choice. Rey, standing with generations of Jedi behind her, chose not to strike in hatred, but to defend in love. She heard the voices of those who came before and stood not as one alone, but as the culmination of the Jedi's belief and the rejection of the Sith's hunger. The legacy of the Sith is written in shadows, etched in stone, and whispered in tombs that still stand under twin suns. They were never just villains, they were reflections of fear, of what happens when power becomes obsession, when control becomes destiny. Their story reminds us that the Force does not choose sides, people do, and every choice echoes across time. Even in silence, even in exile, the Sith shaped the galaxy. Their darkness forced the light to shine brighter, and perhaps that is their truest legacy. Not in empires built or temples risen, but in the light that rose to meet their storm. The Jedi Code, quiet in its phrasing yet thunderous in its impact, was more than a set of beliefs. It was a blueprint for how to interact with the Force and, in turn, the galaxy. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. These words, etched into stone and whispered in temple halls, formed the backbone of Jedi philosophy, guiding younglings from their first training session to the highest ranks of the Order. But over time, what began as a living doctrine became a rigid framework. The Jedi Code, in its early days, was fluid, allowing for interpretation, flexibility, and even cultural adaptation among Jedi serving different systems. The ancient Jedi, especially during the High Republic era, valued individuality and connection. Jedi were encouraged to go on way-seeking pilgrimages, to immerse themselves in planetary customs, to fall in love with cultures and occasionally with people. But as the galaxy grew more politically complex and threats like the Sith loomed, the Jedi Council tightened the code, not to empower, but to control. Attachment became forbidden, seen as a path to obsession. Possession was equated with fear. Love, even in its purest form, was painted as a stepping stone to darkness. Jedi were raised in isolation, often taken from their families as infants and taught to suppress emotion rather than understand it. To be Jedi was to be removed, to stand apart even from oneself. This evolution was not inherently evil, but it planted seeds of vulnerability. In rejecting emotion, Jedi failed to recognize its role in healing, in bonding, in truly understanding the living force. Their suppression became silence, and in silence, they could not hear the galaxy's cries. This disconnection was evident during the Clone Wars, where Jedi served not as peacekeepers, but generals, commanders of armies in a war they did not start, guided by a republic they did not question. They wielded lightsabers against beings who once sought their guidance. Jedi died on battlefields instead of in meditation chambers, and all the while, their code offered no path for grief, no ritual for mourning, no space for fear. Jedi like Anakin Skywalker, raised within this paradox, found themselves torn between doctrine and instinct. He loved fiercely, protected passionately, and yet was told these feelings were wrong. When he dreamed of Padme's death, he turned not to the Council for support, but to the shadows, seeking answers from Palpatine, whose twisted truths seemed more emotionally honest than the Jedi's cold distance. In this way, the code failed not only Anakin, but the Order itself. Their moral clarity became blindness, their emotional restraint became suppression, their faith in the Republic blinded them to its decay. Even Jedi like Yoda, wise beyond centuries, admitted in the end that the Order had become dogmatic, out of touch, and perhaps complicit in its own downfall. But the code also held light. It taught mindfulness, service, humility, and a deep reverence for life. It gave Jedi a compass, a way to resist the temptations of power and anger. The problem was never the code itself, it was the unwillingness to evolve. Luke Skywalker, after the fall of the Empire, sought to rebuild the Jedi Order, but even he wrestled with the legacy of the code. In his early teachings, he leaned toward flexibility, allowing his students to form connections, to understand both light and shadow. But after the tragedy with Ben Solo, Luke recoiled. He saw in himself the same blindness that once doomed the old Jedi. He withdrew, burned the texts, and let the code die with him, until Rey came. With the guidance of Force ghosts and her own intuition, Rey began to reinterpret the code not as law, but as language, a way to live with the Force, not above it. She saw the danger in both extremes, in the Sith's hunger and the Jedi's detachment, and so, the code began again, not in stone or temple, but in choice, in balance, in listening. The evolution of the Jedi Code mirrors the galaxy's own struggle, how to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, how to feel without falling, how to lead without losing oneself. It is a reminder that the Force is not static, it breathes, it moves, it speaks in emotion as much as silence, and those who walk its path must do the same. The Jedi Code remains, not as a chain, but as a compass. A reminder that peace is not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. That harmony is not detachment, but connection. That death is not the end, but a return. In every Jedi who rises, falls, and rises again, the code lives. Not in doctrine, but in choice. In a galaxy shaped by mysticism and warfare, few cultures evoke the same awe and intrigue as the Mandalorians. Armored warriors born of fire, bonded by creed, and feared across systems for their sheer defiance of fate. Long before the fall of the Jedi, long before the rise of Palpatine's empire, the Mandalorians were carving their legacy into the stars, not with Force abilities, but with Beskar steel, strategy, and undying resilience. Their history is not a single tale, but a web of clans, codes, civil wars, and exiles, a culture that refused to be extinguished no matter how many times the galaxy tried. Their ancient conflict with the Jedi was one of philosophy as much as combat. While the Jedi sought peace through discipline and emotional control, the Mandalorians prized strength, honor in battle, and the right to fight for one's beliefs. These clashes, stretching back to the Old Republic, left both sides scarred. The Mandalorians adapted their armor to resist the Jedi's greatest weapon, the lightsaber, and in doing so, forged Beskar into legend. From the Mandalorian Crusades to the fabled Jedi-Mandalorian Wars, they stood not as mindless aggressors, but as a warrior people fighting for survival and sovereignty in a galaxy that often demanded submission. Among their most enduring symbols is the Darksaber, a weapon unlike any other, a flat-bladed black lightsaber forged by Tara Vizsla, the first Mandalorian ever inducted into the Jedi Order. His creation, both revered and contested, would become the symbol of leadership on Mandalore, passed down through combat and bloodline, sparking centuries of power struggles and unification efforts. When Death Watch rose, seeking to restore Mandalore's ancient warrior roots, the Darksaber re-emerged in the hands of Pre Vizsla, and later Darth Maul, whose rule over Mandalore marked a dark chapter of control through fear. Yet it would be reclaimed, reforged, and passed on from Sabine Wren to Bo-Katan Kryze, each bearer inheriting the burden of Mandalorian identity. For Mandalorians, the Darksaber was not just a weapon, but a challenge. Earn it, wield it, unify a divided people, or fall beneath its weight. The Mandalorian creed is not uniform. Some, like the Children of the Watch, adhere to strict traditionalism, never removing their helmets, honoring the way above all else. Others, like Bo-Katan's Night Owls, believe Mandalore must evolve, even if it means loosening the chains of old dogma. This division echoes across Mandalorian history, where even the most powerful leaders faced resistance from their own. Yet it is this struggle between legacy and change, isolation and unity, that makes the Mandalorians endlessly compelling. They are a mirror to the Jedi, but also a lesson. Where Jedi shunned attachment, Mandalorians embraced found families, clans bound not just by blood, but by choice. Where Jedi feared passion, Mandalorians channeled it into loyalty and vengeance alike. And in a galaxy increasingly ruled by empires and orders, Mandalorians stood apart, stateless, yet unyielding. The rise of Din Djarin, known simply as the Mandalorian, introduced this warrior culture to a new era. His journey, from bounty hunter to guardian of Grogu, challenged every preconception about Mandalorians. He upheld the creed, yet grew beyond it. In protecting Grogu, a Jedi child, he bridged the ancient chasm between two enemies. And in doing so, he reminded us that the heart of Mandalorian identity is not conquest, but honor. From Sabine's rebellious art to Boba Fett's quiet reclaiming of his father's legacy, every Mandalorian story offers a glimpse into a people who refuse to be defined by galactic politics. They are warriors, yes, but also artists, leaders, exiles, and legends in their own right. They've lived through purges, survived empires, and watched their homeworld burn, yet they endure. Whether on the sands of Tatooine or the ruins of Sundari, Mandalorians carry more than weapons. They carry the will to rise. Their history teaches us that culture is not armor you wear, but a fire you protect. A creed is not a cage, but a compass. And true strength lies not in domination, but in choosing who you fight for. This is the way. The rebellion did not begin with blaster fire or starships slicing through the void. It began with whispers, with quiet acts of defiance in the shadow of tyranny, with those who chose not to look away when the Empire tightened its grip. It was born in the hearts of the unheard, senators silenced in chambers once meant for peace, farmers taxed to ruin, families torn apart by stormtroopers who answered only to fear. Long before the Rebel Alliance raised its flag, there were pockets of resistance scattered across the stars. Cells, smugglers, defectors, idealists, each fighting their own hopeless war, unsure if anyone else stood beside them. It was Mon Mothma, once a respected senator of Chandrila, who began to unite them. With quiet courage, she condemned Palpatine's regime in public, risking everything to organize a network of rebels beneath the Empire's gaze. Alongside her, Bail Organa of Alderaan provided not only funds and ships, but a vision, a belief that liberty was still possible, even in a galaxy smothered by fear. Yet the rebellion was never just about politics, it was about people. Cassian Andor, hardened by a lifetime of espionage, did the dirty work others wouldn't, sacrificing pieces of himself for a cause that didn't promise survival. Jyn Erso, daughter of the man who built the Death Star, became the unlikely torchbearer of hope when she led the mission to steal its plans. That operation, codenamed Rogue One, was more than a suicide run. It was the moment when scattered resistance found its voice, when bravery and sacrifice collided into a message powerful enough to shake the foundations of the Empire. The Death Star, that terrible moon-sized engine of annihilation, was meant to make resistance futile. Instead, it galvanized rebellion. When the stolen plans reached Princess Leia Organa and she placed them in the care of a simple astromech droid named R2-D2, destiny was set in motion. Through fire and failure, she carried the rebellion on her shoulders, not as royalty, but as a leader who never asked of others what she wouldn't sacrifice herself. Around her gathered legends in the making. Luke Skywalker, a farm boy guided by destiny and haunted by doubt, would become the last hope of the Jedi. Han Solo, a smuggler who once ran from trouble, found something greater than credits, and Chewbacca, a warrior with centuries of wisdom, lent his strength to a cause that spanned lifetimes. Together, they struck the first blow at Yavin 4, where Luke, guided by the Force, fired the shot that destroyed the Death Star. But victory did not bring peace. The Empire struck back with fury, driving the rebellion to the edges of the galaxy, freezing hope on the ice fields of Hoth and scattering its fighters like sparks in the wind. Yet the rebellion endured, not through weapons, but through will. Lando Calrissian, once a man of fortune, risked his freedom to rescue friends. Admiral Akbar, with tactical genius, led fleets that dared to stand against the seemingly endless might of the Imperial Navy. The Battle of Endor marked the turning point. There, amid a forest moon and the unlikely alliance of rebels and Ewoks, the rebellion delivered its final blow. Luke confronted Darth Vader, not with anger, but with compassion, and in the end, it was not the rebellion that destroyed the Emperor, but a father's love for his son. That moment, more than any battle, defined what the rebellion truly was, not just a war, but a restoration of belief. Even after the fall of the Empire, even as remnants regrouped into the First Order, the spirit of the rebellion lived on, in new names, new leaders, and new sparks of hope. It was passed to the resistance, carried by General Leia Organa, who never stopped fighting. The galaxy may have changed its face, but tyranny returned. And once again, the brave step forward. The rebellion story is not a relic of the past. It is a living force, fueled by every person who chooses courage over comfort, truth over silence, and freedom over fear. It reminds us that sometimes, the most powerful weapon in the galaxy is not a saber or a starship, but a single voice saying no. The rise of the Galactic Empire was not an explosion. It was a slow extinguishing of light. It began in the twilight of the Republic, in the echoing chambers of the Galactic Senate, where corruption festered behind noble words and whispers of discontent coiled like smoke. At the heart of this unraveling stood a man cloaked in patience, Sheev Palpatine, the senator from Naboo, whose eyes saw farther than most could imagine. He played a long game, cultivating fear while offering calm, stoking conflict while promising peace. As the Clone Wars erupted across the galaxy, pitting droids against clones, chaos against order, Palpatine rose as Supreme Chancellor, consolidating power under the guise of necessity. He was always there, a reassuring voice amid the storm, a symbol of stability as the Republic frayed at the edges, but beneath the robes of diplomacy lay the dark heart of the Sith. Palpatine was no ordinary politician. He was Darth Sidious, last heir of a hidden Sith legacy that had plotted for centuries to return from exile and reclaim domination. With Darth Tyrannus, once known as Count Dooku, he orchestrated the war from both sides, pulling the strings of the Separatists while directing the Republic's response. Every battle, every loss, every hero fallen in the name of peace fed his design. The Jedi, once guardians of balance, became reluctant generals, fighting a war they didn't start for a government they no longer trusted. Their ability to sense the Force was clouded, shrouded by Sidious's growing power, and then came the final stroke, Order 66. In a moment, the Jedi were declared the traitors. Across countless systems, their allies turned on them. Clone troopers, once brothers in arms, gunned them down without hesitation. Temples were burned, archives erased, names forgotten. The purge was swift, brutal, and near complete. Palpatine used this moment to unveil his true self. No longer a chancellor, he declared himself emperor, and the Republic cheered. He had ended the war. He had saved them. With thunderous applause, freedom died. The Empire rose from the ruins, promising safety, unity, and strength. But its peace was built on fear. Planets were stripped of resources. Cultures were erased, entire species enslaved. Stormtroopers patrolled streets where once children played. And from the throne of Coruscant, the Emperor watched it all unfold. His every move wrapped in legality, his every cruelty disguised as order. Dissent was met with silence, resistance with obliteration. The Senate remained, but only as theater. Its members were puppets, mouthing lines while real decisions came from the Emperor and his enforcers. Among them stood Grand Moff Tarkin, whose vision of rule through fear gave birth to the Death Star, a weapon capable of destroying entire worlds. The Jedi, once symbols of light, became myths and cautionary tales. Children grew up without ever seeing one. Temples were dismantled, holocrons were hidden, lightsabers collected like trophies or melted down. Yet the Force never vanished. It stirred in hidden corners, in ancient tombs, in whispered prophecies, in the bloodlines of those who once touched destiny. Even as the Empire tightened its grip, cracks began to form. Rebel cells emerged, smugglers ferried secrets, senators like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa worked in the shadows, sowing the seeds of rebellion. But the Empire adapted, expanding its reach. Inquisitors, former Jedi twisted by torture and temptation, hunted the survivors. They were led by the Grand Inquisitor, a former temple guard turned predator of his own kind. Palpatine's new apprentice, Darth Vader, enforced his will with a lightsaber and a shadow that stretched across the stars. He was the dark reflection of what the Jedi had failed to prevent. Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, lost to fear, anger, and grief. Now a figure of terror, clad in black armor and fueled by pain, Vader extinguished hope wherever it flickered. He was Palpatine's instrument, but also his greatest threat. For deep within the metal and rage, the light still flickered. The Empire's strength was vast, but it came at a cost. Its very existence required suppression, deception, and control. It was not a government, it was a wound on the galaxy. And every wound, no matter how deep, draws attention. The Force remembers. Across distant moons and forgotten temples, something began to stir. Children with dreams they didn't understand, smugglers who chose loyalty over profit, farmers who picked up blasters. The galaxy would not forget what freedom once felt like, nor would it forgive the chains that replaced it. The Empire's rise was not just a shift in power, it was a distortion of balance, and the longer that balance tilted, the stronger the eventual backlash would become, because even in darkness, stars burn, and in the heart of tyranny, rebellion always waits. To understand the Star Wars saga is to understand the Force, not merely as energy or power, but as the thread that binds the galaxy together, unseen yet ever present, ancient yet eternally renewing. The Force is not light or dark, good or evil, it is balance, the tension and harmony between opposites. From the earliest myths whispered on Typhon to the final breaths of fallen Jedi, the Force flows through all living things, connecting what is, what was, and what has yet to come. Jedi speak of it with reverence, calling it the light side, the guiding presence of compassion, wisdom, serenity, and selflessness. It is the path of guardians, of those who use power not for conquest but for peace. The Jedi train to let go of fear, of attachment, of the need to control outcomes. They believe in trust, in destiny, in the quiet strength of service. But just as light casts shadows, so too does the Force reveal a darker path, the seductive power of the dark side, born of anger, fear, hate, and desire. The Sith do not shun these emotions, they embrace them, feeding their strength by surrendering to passion. To the Sith, the Force is a tool, a weapon to bend the galaxy to their will. They see the Jedi's restraint as weakness, and in their pursuit of ultimate power, they twist the Force into something unnatural. This eternal tension between selflessness and domination, balance and imbalance, is at the heart of every Star Wars story. It is not always clear who walks which path. Heroes fall, villains rise, and the lines blur in moments of loss and longing. Anakin Skywalker was born of prophecy, shaped by compassion and ambition, destined to bring balance to the Force, but his fear of loss led him to the dark. His son, Luke, walked the same cliff's edge, tempted by power, pulled by love, ultimately choosing mercy. The Force is not static. It evolves, it responds. It calls to those who listen and waits patiently for those who don't. Some connect to it instinctively, like Rey on Jakku, sensing something ancient stir within her. Others, like Chirrut Imwe, believe without wielding, walking in tune with the Force despite never lifting a lightsaber. The Jedi Order sought to understand the Force through discipline, through generations of teaching and tradition. They studied it in temples, preserved its knowledge in holocrons, and built their lives around its guidance. But in their dogma, they also lost something, a sense of flexibility, of openness to new truths. Their downfall was not just a result of betrayal, but of stagnation. The Sith, in contrast, embraced evolution, but at the cost of destruction. Their hunger for dominance led to war, to extinction, to their own endless betrayals. Darth Bane sought to escape this cycle through the rule of two, one master, one apprentice, so that knowledge would be preserved, passed, and honed without internal collapse. And still, the darkness found new ways to survive, to seep back into the cracks of a wounded galaxy. In forgotten corners of the universe, ancient Force wielders known as the Night Sisters of Dathomir tapped into mystical versions of the dark side, calling it magic and weaving it into rituals. The Bendu, neither Jedi nor Sith, spoke of the Force as a storm, not to be controlled, but to be accepted. Mortis, a realm beyond space and time, revealed the Force personified. The father, the daughter, the sun, light, balance, and darkness in eternal struggle. Across all these stories, the Force remains the same, mysterious, vast, deeply personal. It is the whisper in a child's dream, the vision in a hermit's exile, the final breath of a fallen warrior. It guides but does not dictate. It offers but never demands. And perhaps most profoundly, it believes in choice. Every Jedi who falls to darkness chooses to do so. Every Sith who turns to the light makes that choice too. It is not prophecy, not fate, but free will that defines a legacy. And so the Force continues, through Luke, through Leia, through Rey, through those who may never hold a saber but still act with courage, kindness, and faith. It lives in stories passed from parent to child, in sacrifices made in silence, in sparks that light the fire of rebellion. The Force is not something to be wielded, it is something to be lived. In the quiet between battles, in the calm after war, in the moments when a single act of hope ripples across the stars, the Force is there, waiting, watching, believing, and in every ending it offers a beginning. Because light returns, balance is restored, and the story always continues. The galaxy had endured under the iron rule of the Empire for nearly 2 decades, when the faintest spark of rebellion began to flicker among the stars. It did not start with fleets or armies, but with whispers. Whispers in cantinas, coded transmissions in shadowed back rooms, quiet meetings between smugglers and senators, farmers and freedom fighters. The rebellion was not a monolith at first. It was scattered, uncertain, fractured by fear and distance, but in time, its fragments found one another, drawn together by a common thread, the belief that tyranny could not be allowed to rule forever. Among the earliest rebel leaders was Mon Mothma, a former Imperial senator who risked everything to speak openly against Emperor Palpatine. Her courage inspired others to step forward. Bail Organa of Alderaan, Saw Gerrera and his partisans, even factions of disillusioned clones and rogue droids. But it was not until the theft of the Death Star plans that the rebellion became something real, something unified, something undeniable. That act of bravery, carried out by a ragtag crew led by Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor, cost lives, but it also lit a flame across the galaxy. The Death Star, a moon-sized weapon of unimaginable power, was no longer invincible. The plans reached Princess Leia Organa, a secret rebel leader under the guise of Alderaanian royalty, and from her hands into the grasp of a farm boy on the desert world of Tatooine. His name was Luke Skywalker. The son of Anakin Skywalker, though neither he nor the galaxy yet knew it, Luke represented a new hope, one grounded in innocence, in potential, and in the Force. With the help of Obi-Wan Kenobi, now an old hermit known as Ben, Luke took his first steps into a larger world. Alongside the smuggler Han Solo, his co-pilot Chewbacca, the resourceful Princess Leia, and the loyal droids R2-D2 and C-3PO, Luke found himself drawn into a war he never asked for, but came to believe in deeply. Their journey led them to Yavin 4, where the Rebel Alliance planned a desperate attack on the Death Star. It was there, in the silence of space, guided by instinct and faith in the Force, that Luke fired the shot that destroyed the Empire's ultimate weapon. In that moment, the galaxy changed. The Empire was not defeated, not yet, but its myth of invincibility was shattered. Luke became a symbol. Leia, once just a senator's daughter, became a general in the making. Han, the reluctant rogue, began to understand that some causes were worth fighting for, and the rebellion, once fragile, now had momentum. It grew bolder, stronger, more organized. Across the galaxy, oppressed worlds dared to hope again. Jedi teachings long thought lost began to stir anew as Luke trained under the ancient Master Yoda on Dagobah, confronting not just the Empire, but the darkness within himself. He learned of his true parentage, that Darth Vader, the Empire's enforcer, was his father, and with that truth came a choice: fear, hatred, vengeance, or compassion, understanding, redemption. Luke chose the harder path. While the rebellion launched attacks on Imperial installations, struck from secret bases like Hoth and Sullust, Luke confronted Vader, not with violence, but with love. In the throne room of the second Death Star, before the eyes of Emperor Palpatine himself, Luke refused to fall. And in that refusal, something stirred in Vader, in Anakin, a memory of who he once was. The rebellion fought on. Leia led armies, Han inspired courage in others, Lando Calrissian helped rally smugglers and saboteurs, and on the forest moon of Endor, a final battle unfolded. As stormtroopers marched and walkers crushed trees, the Ewoks, a humble species underestimated by the Empire, fought back with traps and courage. In the skies above, rebel pilots like Wedge Antilles attacked the Death Star once more, and deep inside, Anakin Skywalker turned against his master. He destroyed the Emperor to save his son, giving his own life in the process. The second Death Star exploded, the Emperor was gone, and the galaxy exhaled. In bonfires across distant planets, people danced. Stormtroopers laid down arms. Imperial banners were torn from walls. The rebellion, born from whispers, had become a revolution. Peace, fragile but real, seemed within reach. But this was not the end. In the shadows, remnants of the Empire regrouped, and in the years that followed, new threats would rise. New empires, new darknesses, new choices. But for that moment, for one still, golden moment, under twin moons and firelit skies, the galaxy was free. The fall of the Empire did not mean the end of darkness. In the aftermath of the Battle of Endor, as celebrations echoed across the galaxy and the new republic began to form, Remnants of Imperial power slipped quietly into the unknown regions, regrouping in secret. There, among hidden systems and ancient threats, the embers of tyranny were fanned into flame once more. From those ashes rose the First Order, a militant regime that sought not only to restore the Empire, but to exceed it, to reshape the galaxy in its image with cruelty masked behind precision, order, and fear. While the New Republic disarmed and debated, the First Order constructed vast armadas in secret. Its leaders, including the enigmatic Supreme Leader Snoke, are being cloaked in mystery and immense power, began orchestrating their return. Under Snoke's command stood a new generation of dark warriors, chief among them Kylo Ren, born Ben Solo, son of Princess Leia Organa, and Han Solo. Trained at first by Luke Skywalker as one of the new Jedi, Ben was seduced by the dark side, manipulated by Snoke, and eventually betrayed his fellow students, destroying Luke's fledgling Jedi Order and sending the galaxy into mourning once again. Luke, burdened by failure and haunted by the power of the darkness within his bloodline, vanished into exile on the oceanic planet of Ahch-To. With him gone, and the Jedi seemingly extinct, the Resistance, an underground movement led by General Leia, stood as the galaxy's only defense. They were few, underfunded, and constantly pursued. But Leia had hope, because in the desert sands of Jakku, a new spark had emerged. Her name was Rey. A scavenger with no known heritage, Rey's journey began when she encountered the droid BB-8, who carried part of a map to Luke Skywalker's location. Alongside the ex-stormtrooper, Finn, and the daring pilot, Poe Dameron, Rey was thrust into the growing war between the Resistance and the First Order. Their battles brought them to Starkiller Base, a weapon even more powerful than the Death Star, capable of destroying entire star systems. The Resistance's desperate attack succeeded in destroying it, but not before devastation was wrought. And amid the snowy forests of the collapsing base, Rey faced Kylo Ren in a lightsaber duel, untrained, uncertain, but strong in the Force. She defeated him, not with power, but with a clarity of purpose he had lost. Rey began to search for answers about herself and the Force. Her journey led her to Ahch-To, to Luke Skywalker himself, bitter, withdrawn, afraid to train another Jedi. But through Rey's persistence, Luke slowly reconnected with the Force, revealing ancient truths and painful regrets. She learned of the Jedi's flaws, of balance and failure, and eventually Luke realized he could not hide forever. When the Resistance was cornered on Crate, nearly annihilated, Luke projected his essence across the galaxy in one final act of defiance and hope. His illusion bought the Resistance time to escape, and as he faded into the Force, becoming one with it beneath Ahch-To's twin suns, his legend grew. Inspired by Luke, the galaxy began to stir again. More systems resisted the First Order. Stories of hope spread like fire. Rey, still seeking her path, discovered that she was a descendant not of nobility, but of evil. She was the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine, who had not perished entirely, but lingered in the shadows, manipulating events through dark science and ancient Sith ritual. In the desolate world of Exegol, a Sith Eternal cult had preserved his twisted essence, building a fleet large enough to reclaim the galaxy. As Rey wrestled with her identity, Kylo Ren, torn between light and dark, sought her out. Their bond, a Force dyad, connected them across time and space. Through visions and clashes, Rey came to believe that Kylo could be redeemed, and when he was mortally wounded by Rey during a battle, only to be saved by her compassion, he began to change. Haunted by the memory of his father Han Solo, whom he had killed, Ben Solo cast aside Kylo Ren and returned to the light. Rey, armed with the wisdom of generations of Jedi who came before her, faced Palpatine on Exegol. In the shadow of the Sith fleet, as Resistance forces fought against impossible odds, Rey stood alone until she wasn't. Channeling the voices of past Jedi, she resisted the pull of the dark side and used the Skywalker lightsabers to reflect Palpatine's power back upon him, destroying him at last. The effort killed her, but Ben Solo, arriving in time, gave his life to restore hers, fading into the Force as she awoke. The Sith were gone. The Final Order was destroyed. The Resistance had won, and Rey, now alone again, traveled to Tatooine, the beginning of Anakin's journey, the place where Luke once gazed. At Twin Suns, she buried the Skywalker lightsabers in the sand and ignited her own, a yellow blade symbolizing balance, guardianship, and her own unique path. When asked her name, she paused and answered, Rey Skywalker. It was the end of one saga and the beginning of something new. Across stars and sand, from ancient Jedi temples to cold metal corridors echoing with the hum of lightsabers, the story of Star Wars has always been more than battles and blasters. It is the saga of generations, of masters and apprentices, of fathers and sons, of foundlings and chosen families. It's the quiet resolve in the face of tyranny, the spark that survives even when the galaxy is wrapped in darkness. It is the story of exile and return, of destinies forged and resisted, of names carried and names shed. It reminds us that greatness can rise from humble beginnings, a farm boy staring at twin suns, a scavenger digging through wreckage, a lone Mandalorian carrying a mysterious child through the galaxy. These tales, told through dust and data pads, through whispers in Force dreams, and the clash of rebellion against empires, are all stitched together by one unbreakable thread: hope. Star Wars is a galaxy of extremes, of Sith and Jedi, peace and war, droids and creatures, but it always returns to the choices we make when no one is watching. The quiet decision to stand, even when standing feels impossible. The willingness to forgive, the courage to change. Each character, from Yoda to Rey, from Leia to Anakin, holds a mirror to our own lives. Flawed, searching, learning, rising, and sometimes falling, but always reaching for something greater. And now, as we leave this long journey behind, we drift back through hyperspace to where it all began. A spark in the darkness, a line of blue text, and a music cue that stirs something timeless in the soul. The saga may stretch across 9 films, 100 planets, and countless generations, but at its core, it is a lullaby to the dreamer, the believer, the one who hopes for balance in a chaotic world. Tonight, as you rest, may your dreams carry you across the stars, riding with speeder bikes through forests, walking through Jedi temples bathed in silence, hearing the soft hum of a lightsaber in the distance. May you find stillness in the galaxies far, far away. May the Force be with you, always.